This podcast is not meant to be professional advice of any kind. It is meant to be informative and entertaining. If you make any changes to your life, see the appropriate professional before you do so. Welcome to Super Age. My name's David Stewart. I am the founder of Ageist and your host on the Super Age Show. We talk about how to live healthier, how to live longer, and how to be happier. And who doesn't want that? Welcome to episode 119 of the Super Age Podcast. It is great to have you with us. This will be dropping on February the 1st, 2023. So this morning here in the mountains of Utah, it was kind of shockingly cold. I woke up, looked at my phone, and it was, get this, minus 17 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's kind of chilly. Being Utah, though, as soon as the sun comes up and even when it's like really cold, I think it warmed up to like 10 or something, which is good, 27 degree improvement. But, you warm up pretty quickly. And I was with some of the other people that I'm doing my master's race program with. And, most of us are, a little older. And what I was marveling at was, it was cold, but it wasn't like that cold. We were all okay because of the sort of technologies that we were using out there that were just like not available when I was growing up. I mean, anything, below like 20 degrees when I was growing up skiing would have just been like painful. But this was fine. Like everybody had, they had shells and down and, lots of Gore-Tex and stuff to keep themselves warm. And secret pro tip, boot heaters. Pretty much everybody, all the coaches, all the people in my program have boot heaters. They're like game changers. And remember, I don't know if any of you guys remember like going out, in cold weather, maybe even like 10 years ago, how your feet would turn into blocks of ice. Like, you don't have to do that anymore. And I was thinking about how these technologies not only keep us warm, but even the skis. So I ski on Dinosaur skis because I think they're awesome. I think they're the best ones for me anyway. And how they're shaped and the sort of technology with skis these days, especially these skis, it just makes turning so much easier. It's just unbelievably different than the sort of equipment that I grew up on. Much easier to ski, much easier on the knees. Like, I'm 64. I'm sort of average in my class here. And, there are people in their late 70s who are just really good and were able to do this because of the technological advancements. So those Dinosaur slalom skis that I use, the combination of the wood that they use and the metal and especially the shaping, I'm able to make turns at a rate that would just been incomprehensible to me, 20 years ago. So, yeah. And I'm thinking, skiing is sort of the thing that I'm doing right now. But if we think about, bikes, so like think about the bike that you grew up with and a mountain bike today, or an e-bike today, or a road bike today. They're just these massive technological improvements that allow us to do these things. And yeah, we're in better shape. We take care of ourselves. We do a lot to work on our bodies. But all this gear is really key to us being able to do this. The tennis rackets, the golf clubs, like sort of everything you can think of there have been all these technological improvements which allow people our age, they're not specifically targeted at people our age, but we're clever, so we take advantage of it. And we're able to do this whole range of activities that maybe we couldn't do way back when, because there just wasn't the stuff to allow us to do this. So I guess where I'm going with this is that if there's something out there that maybe you tried skiing when you were in high school and like it was really uncomfortable and didn't like it, well, it's like a whole different ballgame now. And same thing, maybe like bikes. You thought that, mountain biking was, maybe not your gig, but it's like the bike now is just like a completely different thing. So anyway, that's a plug for get outside and engage in some sports, because the equipment around it, everything from the clothing, the protective stuff, the gear itself, it's just vastly advanced that it makes all of us do things that, maybe we could do in our 20s. We didn't think we could do now. We can. So on that topic, if you're out there, maybe you've taken up pickleball. It seems like everybody plays pickleball these days. You're out there and you're active and you're going to be losing electrolytes. You're going to be losing sodium and you're going to be losing water. And last week on the show, we had Rob Wolf on, who is the founder of Element, one of the sponsors of this program. And I wanted to have him on to discuss really this, sodium and electrolytes. One of the great findings I had last year was the impact of not having enough, like losing electrolytes. And the way you replace them is really simple. You put Element in water and you drink it. And hopefully you have that before you're doing some sort of exercise. And then, I have it afterwards too to help replace. Because especially if I'm up on the mountain, I'm out there for like 4 hours. So it's difficult for me to get access to hydration. So I'll try and hydrate beforehand, and then I'll have some right afterwards. I'll tell you, if I don't have Element in my water, what happens is I start to feel a little dizzy. My brain is foggy. My muscles feel just sort of achy and crampy. And then it just takes it's sort of a miracle. 5 minutes after I drink Element, everything feels fine. And I realized that so much of the problems I was having in the past were not about me being old. It was just I wasn't getting the right electrolytes. If you go to drinkelement.com, that's drinklmnt.com/ageist, and you get a free 8-serving sample pack with any purchase. One of the other products that I've been using that has had a real impact is from Timeline Nutrition. It's called MitoPure. It's a urolithin A product. If you don't know what urolithin A does, just Google it. There's hundreds and hundreds of studies out there about the impact of urolithin A. It's, you can get it from pomegranate juice, but you got to drink a lot of pomegranate juice, and only 40% of Americans have the right biome that they can actually convert the pomegranate juice to urolithin A. And as you get older, that number goes way down. I've been using it. I really noticed the difference in my muscles' ability to recover. My friend Gary, the spin enthusiast, same deal. Dr. Zimmer, who's on our scientific advisory board, sent me a text on Monday saying that after she had read a number of the scientific studies on urolithin A and MitoPure, she's ordering for herself and her husband. If you go to timelinenutrition.com/ageist, you'll save 10% off your first order of MitoPure. This week on the show, we are honored to have Denis Noble. Denis is with the Oxford Center for Longevity. Denis is a super, super interesting guy. We profiled him in Ageist a few weeks ago, and in talking to him, I said, listen, I want you to come on and let's talk about longevity and science and why you're interested in this. He's just a remarkable human being. I believe he is the guy who developed the mathematical model of the heart back in the 60s. So he knows a lot about cardiovascular physiology, and he's been studying longevity science for probably the last maybe 20 years. And he has a lot of very interesting things to say about that, and really a lot of other things. I don't use the word genius too often. Denis is one of those guys. And before we start, I want to remind everybody, after our conversation with Denis, we have our Try This episode, which is just like a little nugget of something you can try this week to improve your life and hopefully have you living longer and living healthier. So let's give Denis a shout. Hi, Denis. How are you today?
Well, remarkably well, given what we've been through recently, which is, after all, 3 years of a pandemic and really quite an extraordinary period of life here in the United Kingdom, with governments collapsing here, right, centre. Anyway, no, I'm in good form. So let's go ahead and see what you want to talk about.
Absolutely. So first, let's tell everybody a little bit about you and your background.
Yes. Well, my name is obviously Denis Noble. Unusually, it's spelt Denis with just one N, but that's the correct way of doing it. You know, it comes from Dionysos, who was the Greek god of wine. Well, that's nice to know, isn't it? And he had only one N. Anyway, very rarely, I've got one N in my name, Denis Noble. I've been a professor at Oxford University for many years, although I studied at the University College in London. And for many years, I was the professor of cardiovascular physiology here. So concerned with a lot of matters to do with aging, health in later life, and particularly in relation, obviously, to the heart and the circulation. I'm going to take a glass of water.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, I might just have difficulty controlling the long tail of long COVID, which was long ago that I had COVID. But this tail is sometimes giving me little problems here. Anyway, let's go back to my own background. I was the first person to build a mathematical model to show how the heart's pacemaker works. That's what created my reputation as a physiologist. And then I went on to many aspects of heart physiology, and particularly what is it that causes heart attack and heart arrhythmia, the things that people worry about in older age, though it can also happen in young people, but particularly in older people, the problems of arteries clogging up, of the heart not getting enough oxygen to it, and the arrhythmias that produces. And sometimes, of course, those can be the fatal arrhythmias of ventricular fibrillation and similar processes. So that's my original background. But in the last 20 years or so, during retirement, I'm supposed to be retired, but that, I'm afraid, hasn't worked as a strategy. I work probably more than I did when I was in post. Anyway, for the last 20 years, I've been concerned with a rather wider group of medical problems, and that is, naturally enough, I'm 86 after all, what are the problems of aging, and what should we try to do about it? And there are several ways in which you can think about this. Some people think that it's just so inevitable that you can't do anything about it. I don't hold that view, because that itself is not a viable solution to the problem. Because if we go on as we are with the developed nations, the richest nations in the world, and those following on from us, the developing nations coming to the same kind of situation, we will find that we have an aging population, many of whom are not well, many of whom do need care, being supported by a relatively smaller group of working population. And that's not a viable solution in the long term. It is therefore, I think, well, yes, there are many things still to do on the heart, and there are other people doing that probably much better than I did when I was in post. But, that's a small issue compared, big issue as it is, it's a small issue compared to what I'm now talking about. As you get into long life, but very unhealthy life, you're having a big burden on society. I'm not blaming people. I'm saying that this is what we're now seeing, and I think we have to do something about it. And I don't think we should accept that there is nothing you can do about it. You've just got to grin and bear it. So there are my credentials. It's the reason that I helped to found what we call the Oxford Longevity Project just 2 or 3 years ago. We are not a research organization. We are not, as it were, necessarily providing the research solutions. What we are doing is broadcasting to a mix of people who are interested in longevity and health span about what we identify as some of the major discoveries that are occurring, and then we try to make it understandable to lay people. That's the idea. So usually there's a fundamental scientist telling us about the latest studies on autophagy or whatever technical issue it might be. And then we have somebody, a clinician or someone else, able to interpret that for the common man in the street. And we think this is a very valuable way of communicating the need for society to do something about this. So there are my credentials and how I've got involved in the whole issue of healthy aging rather than unhealthy aging.
It seems to me that as we mentioned before we got on the podcast, the solution to the economic problem is, well, I don't want to say simple because it's complicated, but just to increase health span. Just doing that.
Right. No, exactly so. And what we did in our first broadcast was to involve economists in telling us just what the costs of doing nothing would be. It is utterly shocking. We've had a pandemic for 3 years now. The cost of that is felt by nearly all societies around the world, and it's big. But I tell you, the cost of doing nothing about the aging problem is even bigger by many-fold. And that's what Andrew Scott and other economists have calculated. You just do the projections and you see what will be the health costs, or the health care costs, I should say, from those projections. It is unsustainable. I don't know any politicians around the world who have seriously understood how big this problem is and how urgent it is to try to tackle it now rather than when it grows in importance. That's what I'm devoted to at the moment.
Wonderful. So let's talk about how we're going to do this.
Well, okay. I can tell you my own view on this, I think, really quite quickly. What we've done in the last 30 years, roughly, since the launching of the Human Genome Project, as a project first, and then as a very highly successful project. Please understand, I'm not criticizing the scientists who have sequenced the genome. They've done a magnificent job, and they succeeded. And they succeeded first in around the year 2000, so just over 20 years ago. Now, as a scientific project, that has been extremely helpful. It enables evolutionary biologists to much more accurately work out the trees of interrelation between the species. And so that is great. And so also, if as a family member, you want to work out whether you are related to X over there by some process of working out from genomes, you can go to 23andMe or any other company that will do this for you, sequence your genome, and then give you some hints as to who else you might be related to. So from the viewpoint of the genomes acting as markers of who belongs to what part of what tree of life, it's fantastic. No question about that. However, what the leaders of the project proclaimed in the 1990s, so 30 years ago now, was that once we have sequenced the human genome, we will find that within 10 years, we've got cures for cancer, cures for schizophrenia, cures for depression, cures for heart disease, cures for pancreatic disease. I go on, and it's the whole gamut of the various diseases that are the cause of great problems in old age and which restrict health span to being much less than lifespan. And there's the problem. It's that difference, which can be 8, 10, 15, 20 years of intensive care. Now, again, I'm not criticizing those who actually did the work to sequence the genomes. I think, though, the project was oversold in terms of its clinical value. We have not seen the cures for cancer. We have not seen the cures for cardiac disease. We have not seen the cures for depression, and so on. Yes, there are hints, ideas, but we're now 23 years on from the first full sequencing of the human genome. Moreover, my own work shows why that is true. You see, and I'll be technical for a moment, what the genome-wide association studies do is to measure, first of all, from your full sequencing, which variations of each gene you've got. And then they will look at the various disease states that people with those particular genes have suffered. You will get then an estimate of, if you've got this gene, by how much above the random change in the population will you be likely to experience that particular disease? Well, now, the most interesting thing is this. There are a few genetic diseases, well-known genetic diseases, where the association is quite high. If you have something like cystic fibrosis, for example, there's a very straight correlation between the gene involved in cystic fibrosis and getting the disease. But for the great majority of the gene variants that are associated with the diseases of old age, apart from those very clearly but rare genetic diseases, the association levels are quite small. In fact, the prediction will be that there might be 1 or 2 or 3 or 4% higher chance of getting a disease. This is not the 50%. This is not something that really would cause most people to take really serious preventive measures. Now, why is that? 30 years ago, my group showed why association levels between a particular gene and the observed effects in the organism can be quite small, even when the gene is very important. And we did that with the genes that are responsible for cardiac rhythm. You can take a particular gene, or the protein, of course, that is made by using that gene. It will contribute maybe 80% of the electric current that generates your heartbeat and mine. You block it, and remove, therefore, the protein or the action of the protein involved, or remove the gene, doesn't matter which way you do it. And what you find is only a very modest change in frequency. In fact, that is the basis of producing, as a French company did, a very valuable cardiac slower. It just slows by about 10%, not 80%. Now, why is that? Well, the reason is very obvious. As physiologists, we know too well what is happening. The networks that control processes like that, highly important processes in the body, are multiply backed up. There is redundancy, just as when you fly on an aircraft, the pilot will have access to a backup program if, for any reason, the control program for the aircraft goes wrong. And that's what you'd expect. So what's happening is that for the vast majority of diseases that are causing the headache of aging populations, the association levels between a particular gene and that problem are very small. Now, that has developed to the point where many scientists now think you've got to think of an omnigenic hypothesis. That is, that nearly all genes are involved in one way or another in all processes in the body, in which case there really isn't a gene for this and a gene for that. It's more that the body uses the whole panoply of genes to create what it needs to continue to function. And it can do that even with major ones missing. So hard though it is to say, I think we have unfortunately poured the resources, the huge funding, into the wrong answer to the aging population. The aging population suffers from these multifactorial diseases with many genes involved, and that will not yield to just more sequencing of people's genomes.
I also think here that so many of the diseases, there's certain things that just sort of happen with age, but I would say that our behavior, how we're signaling these genes, what are we doing, which is actually under our control. Like nobody puts anything in our mouth. We do it ourselves, right? So that's where so much, influence we have.
Absolutely right. I agree. And you see, I think what we've got to remember is what we've learned, for example, from looking at identical twins, one of whom becomes an athlete and the other does not. And you find that the one who becomes an athlete not only develops stronger muscles, that's expected, but it influences even the little molecules called RNAs that regulate the genome.
Exactly. Yep.
So it all trickles down. There is absolutely no doubt that the biggest thing you can do to remain healthy in old age is to keep active. Even if it's difficult, it's best to keep active. You use it or you lose it. But that's not just a matter of whether your muscles are strong or not. It's that too, and whether you can climb the stairs or not, and so on and so forth. It is also that the other health benefits, in addition to improving your skeletal and muscular system, those benefits are general. There's the there's the real reason why that particular lifestyle issue, and it's not the only one, I can spend time talking about others too, that particular lifestyle issue is probably the number one, I would think, in terms of maintaining good health. Keep going, keep doing things. Even if it's only, moving around a dance floor, or even if it's only joining a singing club. Singing is a fantastic way of getting control over you and feeling good. And why do you feel good with all of these activities? You feel good because it's filtering down, just like, as I said earlier on, with the experiments on identical twins, the one that really exercises and gets going has an improvement in all respects. It's not just in their muscular system. So there's number one. Keep going, keep exercising. But as you know, there are many others.
Looking at you, Dennis, what comes to my mind is joy is an epigenetic signal.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I tell you another thing. I've actually researched the evidence, which is quite serious, that there is a connection between the way in which one conducts oneself in relation to joy, and particularly the joy of sexual relations, for example. It actually is itself a longevity factor. Now, what some people have done in relation to that is to ask seriously the question, what is actually going on there? If there is really some kind of relationship between the way in which you conduct your love life and longevity. What is the origin of that? And that results in discovering that there are chemicals in the sperm that are highly related to processes that maintain good health in old age. One of those, very naturally, because it's found in sperm, is called spermidine, but it's also found elsewhere in the body. It's a natural compound, and you can get it. It's not too difficult to find spermidine on the internet and be able to order it. And it's been shown to control the process of autophagy. And perhaps I should explain briefly just what that is. You see, the reason why people's skin becomes a bit crinkled, the reason why you look rather less well in older age if you don't look after yourself, is largely because a lot of tissue survives that really ought to be removed. The body is continually removing cells that are no longer functioning well. That's a function of the immune system, which has cells specifically designed to tell particular unwell cells, if you like, is please, in the interest of the rest of the body, just die. Now, there is a process. It's called apoptosis. That's just a technical name. But it is a process by which the body can tell certain cells to die. The immune system does that all the time. It tells cells that don't produce the immunoglobulin that will capture the virus that's attacked you, you're no good, just go away, and you're no longer going to be alive. Now, the important point is that process weakens in old age. It is therefore valuable to be able to stimulate it, to restore some of the autophagy. Some of the people the Oxford Longevity Project interacts with are very famous for what they've done in this area. There are scientists in Japan that we interact with, for example, at the university in Osaka, one of the biggest universities in Japan, which that department happens to be the Department of Pharmacology there, actually won the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine just recently, a few years ago, for understanding the cellular processes by which autophagy occurs. So there's already a process which can be augmented because we've now, through understanding possible ways in which people can prolong their productive life, that there may be chemicals that underlie that. So that's one possible approach. But there's really quite a number of other chemicals that are known now to be worth exploring. In many ways, too, you can control a lot of that just by what you eat, because these are not chemicals that have to be provided, specially by a pharmaceutical company. In many cases, you'll find them. One that I took recently, for example, when I was trying to deal with the physiology and pathology of suffering from long COVID, which is a breathing difficulty. And obviously, I did the one thing you'd expect a physiologist to do, which is to breathe steam that's got some salt in it. It's very simple. You can get nebulizers on the internet very easily. And it does wonders for that kind of disease of old age where you become asthmatic. You just say, I can't walk 10 yards before I'm out of breath. Well, if that's what you're finding, then do try this. What I did in addition to that was that I actually added a supplement of a compound called quercetin. Now, you'll find that in raspberries, you'll find it in blackberries, you'll find it in all kinds of red fruits. So you could do the same just by eating a lot of those. And that's why, of course, people who talk about healthy diets naturally advise some of the plants that are well known to provide that benefit. So I've already talked, therefore, about two of the compounds that are important in helping us to stay healthy, spermidine, quercetin as good examples. But I've got a view on this which I think needs to go a bit further than just the one or two chemicals that I've mentioned so far. You see, we have evolved together with the plant world. Our origins of multicellular organisms like us and dogs and rabbits and so on, that goes back about 500 million years. And it's during the majority of that time that the plants have also been developing. And there's an extraordinary relationship between the plants and the animals that use the plants. It's not that the plants are just there and that we're just here. It is that our being where we are depends on the interrelation with them. Just imagine this. Why are the bees going around to get the nectar from all of those flowers? To, of course, put and produce the lovely honey that comes from a honeycomb. Well, they're actually doing it in the plant's own interest because the plant relies on the bees to fertilize and to carry the plant's activity out to other parts and to spread. And that's the way plants spread. They can't do so by walking like you and us can. They have to do it by relying on animals, in effect, not just bees, but many other insects, and indeed we ourselves. We often, just by brushing against the flowers, will inevitably carry some of their germ cells through to other parts and so spread the activity. Animals that berry nuts do exactly the same too. Now, what I'm coming to is this. Therefore, the plants have evolved to make it attractive to eat them. And this may surprise you. A lettuce actually likes some of it to be eaten. Now, you might think that's crazy. The lettuce likes being destroyed because we eat it. Well, you don't need to destroy it. You just take some of the leaves. 3 or 4 years ago, when I was taking part in a documentary filming in Korea, in South Korea, I was acting almost like a Buddhist monk. I was going around some of the temples in South Korea. This was back in 2019. One of the people I met there was a very famous nun. Actually, in Korea, they call them the same thing. They both are called monks, whether they're male or female, it doesn't matter. I rather like that, incidentally. So John Kwan, who is the nun that I met, is very famous as a cook. She actually appeared on Chef's Table in New York because of her fantastic ability to cook vegetarian dishes that taste really delicious. So don't think that going vegetarian doesn't, or means in some sense or another, you're going to be missing out on some of the great delicacies. She showed, as have many other vegetarian cooks, of course, how good it can be. But you see, what I remember is this. I walked with her and 1 or 2 others to the forest where she keeps her garden, and she showed us how you take the leaves from the plants while leaving the plant still active. It was a very clever and gentle technique. And once you know it, it means you don't just pull the whole lettuce up. You just let it continue to grow, and you go back a week later and there are more leaves, and you take. Now, the point I'm making is that plants, as it were, know that. And over the millions of years, they have developed the kinds of things that are attractive to us. That's why it's nice to eat them. But that's in their interest, as I proposed a bit earlier. So this leads me to another point, which is that modern medicine often dismisses herbal remedies as somehow or another strange. They're not well researched from the point of view of the science. Well, that's no longer true. Many of them have been well researched. But let me tell you something. About half of the pharmacopoeia in the United States and here in the United Kingdom and other countries, the pharmacopoeia is, of course, the listing of all the drugs that are available for doctors to prescribe. Nearly half of those originally came from plants. Of course, often now we make the same chemicals, but they were originally produced from plants. Very good example from my own area of the heart. The foxglove was found 200 or so years ago to be very effective at treating certain forms of heart disease. The point I'm making is there's a very big resource here. And I think one of the urgent tasks for medical science is to systematize that knowledge and its interpretation in terms of modern science more than we have done. I think, therefore, that research scientists can do a lot to contribute to how we can create longer health span and hopefully not have such a long period of illness in old age. So I think there are many things that can be done and which we should be looking to doing. And a lot of them are not very expensive. That's the good thing about it. Doesn't cost much to go and walk in a forest. Doesn't cost much to go on a dance floor. I can tell you because I do both.
So you have me thinking about plants and things from nature. So what the first one that comes to mind are the rapalogs. So rapamycin and
yes,
and those. Do you have any thoughts on those?
Well, I know something of the story of rapamycin. Unfortunately, it seems not to be as effective as we would have liked. So I'm not too sure about the future of that in relation to these questions. But there are now well-established books and treatments of the question, which are the chemicals that satisfy a series of criteria? Do they promote autophagy? Do they help the body's fight against cancer? Do they do X, Y, and Z? It gets technical once you get into that. But there are now quite a lot of websites where you can find out that kind of information. There are even suggestions of complete programs of trying to use plant or similar products to improve healthy long life.
I had Nir Barzilai on the show about a year ago, and
Right.
Nir is a great proponent of metformin. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Actually, I don't know that, Ed. I'm sorry about that. I'll have to pass on some things because, the problem for any medical scientist is the range of stuff that is available is vast. I won't unfortunately be able to make a big comment on that.
Well, let's go back to your specialty, which is
Yes.
cardiovascular physiology.
Yes.
What are the markers? So, there's LDL, HDL, ApoB.
Yes,
what are you looking at there, and what do you like to see?
What of course causes the major diseases of old age of a cardiovascular nature? One is a very high one is hardening of arteries. And this is thought, of course, to be the plaques of cholesterol and similar products that build up in the arteries. And what that does is to make them less expandable. So when you exercise and you need a lot of blood to go through to the heart, it won't flow through as easily as you would like. Those who are listening to this broadcast that have had what are called stents will know that what the surgeon does when he inserts a stent is to, as it were, force the artery to become wider and to let more blood go through. But that is a kind of intervention to see to the problem after it's arisen. But there's a lot one can do in relation to getting the cholesterol and similar ratios reasonably well controlled. And the best advice I can give people there is to go to your medical practitioner and ask for the nurses that are well versed in that kind of treatment, and get blood tested to see what your various cholesterol levels are, and take the advice on what to do if it looks as though you ought to be a bit more cautious. It might just be a matter of eating less ice cream. Now, that may disappoint you, but I tell you, I occasionally have an ice cream as a special dessert in a big dinner, but I have never regretted giving up using it every day.
No, and my recollection, Dennis, is that the diseases associated with cardiovascular, I'll call it dysfunction, are the number one cause of death.
They are, in effect. Yes, that's right. I mean, surprising it might be. You might think it would be cancer, but actually, when you add up all the various cardiovascular diseases, and the top on that is certainly blood circulation, because once the blood circulation does not go well, then you're onto a downward spiral, because the heart particularly is a great consumer of energy, and the biggest cause of arrhythmia is, of course, itself produced by a lack of oxygen getting to the heart. So that's easily one of the number one factors to look out for. It's easy to do. You go to your GP, you ask for a blood test, they will tell you the various levels of the things that matter, and they'll give you advice on what to do diet-wise, and it doesn't cost much to do that.
Yeah, I'm one of those people who I like a lot of measurements, and frequently.
You look very energetic yourself.
Well, I my intention is to keep it that way.
Absolutely so. Yes.
So I just went, like, I had to ask my GP. I said, well, let's do a calcium CT scan of my heart, and he's like, well, we did that 3 years ago, and I said, well, that was 3 years ago. Let's see, what's the delta? Are things changing? And I I said, let's compare. I did for the first time, I did a cardioid ultrasound to just see, like, well, is there anything happening there? And I'm fine, but my intention is to keep it fine and to stay on top of this. Yeah.
Yes. Now, we've dealt with number one in one sense, but shortly up in that panoply of the real dangers is cancer, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And you won't be surprised that I've been looking into that question as well. We've actually not really succeeded in what is called the war on cancer. That was, as some older people in your listeners would remember, was launched by President Nixon around 50 years ago. When it comes to, now, early stage cancer, we're getting very good at dealing with, and that's a great success, no doubt. But when it comes to what we call late stage, when what is called metastasis occurs, our success rate is very low. What typically happens with the late stage, where the cancer has begun to spread throughout the body, is that the options available, like surgery, for example, become difficult or impossible because it's spread into too many tissues. You can't cut out everything. After all, there's then nothing left. So there won't be much of you left if you try surgery on something that is metastasized too much. If it hasn't done so, people tend to use radiotherapy to try to zap the developing cancer. But if it has already spread a lot, then the option is chemotherapy, which means, in effect, attacking the cancerous tissue itself. Now, you can think of the cancerous tissue as a part of the organism that has become detached from the organism's own interests. It's got its own interests, which is like an organism within the organism. It's a strange way of thinking about it, but if you think about it in that way, you'll understand what I'm going to say now. If you attack organisms, any organism, with something that zaps it, like antibiotics to attack bacteria, or insecticides to attack insects, it won't surprise you that the organisms react by changing their genomes. Now, you may find that difficult to accept. If you're a standard evolutionary biologist, you'll say, come on, Dennis, that's impossible. It doesn't happen. Forget about it. Well, we know it does. If you attack a cancerous tissue with chemotherapy or radiotherapy, you actually provoke it to change its genome. And the process by which that happens is well known. It's well known through what we know about the immune system. The immune system works by capturing a new virus or a new bacterium by virtue of the fact that it can make new proteins that fit and are able to grab the new virus, coronavirus, for example. How does it do that? Well, it actually changes the genome in the cells of the immune system. That's how it is done. Now, I'm saying that that is a general problem. And when you attack, as a doctor will, with chemotherapy or radiotherapy, a late-stage cancer, you may, hopefully, kill it off enough for a permanent cure. But that's unfortunately rarer than we once imagined it would be. Very often what happens is it produces a period of several years, which is good, when the cancer has, as it were, retreated, but it will then come back in an even more virulent form. And unfortunately and sadly, this is what frequently happens. And it's the reason why we've not made as much progress with treatment of late-stage cancer as we would like. Now, again, there are helpful clues in lifestyle. There are compounds that feel and are good against possible cancerous developments. Some of the spices, for example, are well known to do this. Curcumin, which is found in curry spices, for example, well known to be a good anti-cancer agent. So once again, to the degree you can do it, a healthy lifestyle in terms of diet is a good thing to go for. It's obvious also to your listeners that smoking is a no-no if you really want to look after yourself in old age. Oh, yes, there are smokers who live to be very old. That happens. Of course, it's a statistical issue. But if you really want to improve your chances of living a long, healthy life, then that also is a factor. So lifestyle factors, again, turn out to be some of the simplest ways of dealing with things. So when I said earlier on that the problem with the multifactorial diseases that old age tends to highlight is that we can't find simple, this one protein, this one gene, you intervene with that and you've got the solution. That doesn't mean that there are many things that we can already do, and many of those are actually not very expensive. So one of the solutions to the big economic problem that I highlighted earlier on, which is the sheer cost of the healthcare in an aging population, is just to remain as healthy as you can. In that, you're contributing to society generally, not only to your own health, which is a good thing to do, and much more interesting in old age if you can remain active, but also contributing to helping society as a whole to deal with what is actually a looming problem of immense proportions. So I don't think we should sit back and think there's nothing we can do about it all. We can do a lot in terms of helping ourselves. Now, I wanted to go into a slightly different angle on this, which I've hinted at already. It is this, that I think we need to do more research on the better of the herbal remedies that have been around for a long time, because if we could validate those more effectively with modern research techniques, we would automatically find that we've got multi-component treatments for multifactorial problems. And if you think about it, it makes sense. If you've got many things that cause a particular problem, you need to have a multi-component treatment for it. Now, you may be surprised by that, but I'll tell you a little story, or I can recommend you to find out what I'm saying is true. Go into any general ward in a hospital at the time when the nurse is going around with the prescriptions. She will go around with a number of dishes on her trolley for patient X, patient Y, patient Z. Look at the number of chemicals that are there. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's the situation in most general wards of most hospitals dealing with aged populations. So we are already using multi-component treatment. Now, I'm not talking without acting. I have done research on herbal remedies to find out, in the case of the various ones I've worked on, how they work. It can be done. It needs very clever thinking because it requires an integrative way of thinking rather than a reductive way of thinking. Mm. You're not looking for just one gene or just one chemical that will do the trick. There isn't a magic trick for dealing with that kind of medical problem. What you need to do is to see what's the profile of that particular problem and which of the various herbal remedies has that kind of profile. It could be done if the money was put in to do it. I spent about 5 years until around 2018 investigating such a remedy, and we managed in the course of that 5 years to come to a very good explanation for why that particular remedy works.
Can I ask you what that was, Dennis?
Sorry?
What was the remedy you were researching?
Oh, the remedy, I'll give you its name, but none of you will know it. It's Shakuyaku Kanzoto, which I will explain it a little bit better. You can find information on it on my website if you go to Systems Biology on my website. No, what it is actually is a remedy that's been known for around 2,000 years. It's based on 2 roots, the peony. Most people know about peonies in their gardens, and licorice, and most people know about licorice because children like licorice sweets. Now, you put those 2 together, you get a remedy for severe muscle cramp. And people in the countries that use these kinds of remedies, like Japan, Korea, and China, use this all the time to deal with cramp. A good athlete in Japan will automatically carry, I'll call it SKT rather than Shakuyaku Kanzoto. But anyway, many of them carry SKT in the back pocket in order to treat themselves. The point I'm making is we came to a really clear explanation for how it may work. It largely works, incidentally, by improving the circulation in the cramped muscle. That's how we believe it works. Now, go to ask any major newspaper, what do you do about muscle cramp? They've nearly all got, occasional articles on medical science. Well, the Times had one like this about 5 years ago. I still got the headline, you see. What do you do about cramp? Well, what you do about cramp is, first of all, take vinegar. Now, I've no idea how that idea came about, but it does you no damn good at all, I can tell you. And vinegar doesn't taste very nice unless you're using it together with fries. So, number one, absolutely no good at all. The second was avoid the cramp in the first place. Don't do the exercise. That's balmy. advice,
I love the Times.
I mean, goodness me, you give the advice, don't get the cramp in the first place. Well, we can say that about all diseases. Don't get it. Well, yes, I mean, don't get it is a good piece of advice, except nobody knows how to deal with that. Third, eat bananas. Now, that's very interesting. It's the only advice that had any grain of truth in it. Now, what I'm leading up to, before I come back to bananas, and before you think that I've gone bananas, the grain of truth there is interesting because it has to do with a particular element, potassium. Mm-hmm. Bananas have a high amount of potassium. And what we find when we did the research on the mechanism of muscle cramp, potassium plays a key role. It would be too technical for me to go into the details of how that is the case, but it does. Now, we then could calculate, you see, we were talking about the level of potassium outside the cells of the body, so in the bloodstream, the lymph, and similar parts of the body. What does it do in cramp? It goes up about threefold, from around 4, don't give the technical detail, to 12. So it's quite a big increase. How many bananas would you have to eat quickly, because the cramp is urgent, to get to that level? I calculated it. 300 bananas in 10 seconds. I do not know anybody who is athletic enough or capable with their digestive system to anywhere near do that. And I tell you also, it'd be highly dangerous if you did, because I can also tell you that that would cause a heart attack. So what I'm coming up to is very interesting, you see. There is actually no Western medication, meaning one developed by a pharmaceutical company, for that problem. The one thing that is known, at least a lot of the time, to work is actually an Oriental medication. It's not available over in the West. It may be that my research on it may help to make it available sometime. I don't know. But the fact is, there are ways, I think, in which for relatively small investments compared to the investments in large-scale genomic research, I think for fairly small investments, we could be targeting quite a number of diseases with multifactorial solutions to multifactorial problems. Now, I don't know whether the word multifactorial worries some of your listeners. All I mean is that there are many causes, there are many factors. That's why I call multifactorial. There are just many factors involved. And nearly all the diseases of old age are just like that.
Well, and I think one of the things that occurs to me when we're speaking about this is not just the sort of plant-based, the herbal things that we can take or the other pharmaceuticals, but to me, I was a photographer for a long time, and I worked for a lot of big companies, and I would work for pretty much anybody. I would even work for the tobacco companies. It's fine, because there's like a label on there. If you're going to smoke, you know what's going to happen to you. The one company I would not work for was McDonald's, because those like 40-ounce big gulp Mountain Dew things, like that, if you want to talk about multifactorial,
yes.
It's just like, why don't you, just go drink like Drano or something? It's just insane.
Yes.
If we're talking about cardiac problems and diseases of old age, inflammation, cancer, all that. Yeah. I mean, if I were king of the world, I would just ban all that stuff.
Yes, there is a problem, isn't there? The fast food market, as it were, has become highly dominant in our lifestyle because people like to, as it were, get food on the run. Well, I tell you, I love France. Now, why should that be of importance to you? The French know how to relax over meals. Now, it doesn't mean to say you won't find McDonald's in France. You will in places. But there is still that attitude towards having a meal, which is you relax over it. Now, that is actually good advice because your digestive system needs time. You can't, as you will all know, you can't go and run a marathon on a big, full stomach. And there's a good reason for that. The blood supply during digestion is attracted to the intestines. They need it. They need the blood supply in order to do the work that is necessary to digest the food that you've eaten. There's a good reason for taking time. And so I've seen both types, as it were, of society. Ones where having a relaxed lunch is taken for granted. And France certainly has been like that for the majority of my career when I've spent a lot of time there. I admit also that you will find the fast food outlets as well. I'm not saying they don't exist, but there is still a culture of taking time. And I think it's the better way to deal with eating generally. Sure, there are occasions when you're stuck in an airport and the only thing you can possibly do is to buy a beef burger or whatever it might be, or a bean burger or whatever it is. But generally, we really do have to find ways of, I think, getting people to understand that that's the unusual situation. It shouldn't be the normal one. There is, as I said, a good physiological reason, health reason for taking time over eating and food. And, it's why it's much more enjoyable doing it with a dinner party than it is on your own. Part of it, and that's another thing, being on your own is not a very good idea if you can possibly avoid being on your own. Another thing that came across to me very clearly in that trip that I had in South Korea in 2019 was the great advice from a monk who was formerly an agricultural worker. He trained himself and learned through becoming a monk. And his advice, when I asked him for very simple advice for people, was, you can't be happy alone. Why do we enjoy theatre? Why do we enjoy a good laugh? Why do we enjoy the excitement of a fantastic piece of music? It comes back to joy. Mm-hmm. What does joy do? Goodness, does it cause all kinds of chemicals in the body? They're the chemicals that enable us to have that experience of joy, to feel, as it were, on top of the world. So it's very important to try to arrange your life so that you're not alone. You do interrelate with people. And that's, again, a huge health benefit, to be with people and find ways in which you can communicate with others.
I think that, there's all the Blue Zone stuff, and they talk about, oh, it's the purple potatoes, it's the this, it's the that. No, it's not. What we have societies who
exactly.
They understand how to live well.
Right.
And they put an emphasis on this. And it's true, if you live in Okinawa, your biome is probably, optimized to eat purple potatoes. I don't know if mine is or not. Who knows? But what we do know is that that's what I see from all these. It's groups of people who live in community. They just, like, we sort of somewhere in the back of our lizard brains, Dennis, like, we all know how to live well. Yes. And we just sort of try and block it out. But I think that's like 90% of this.
Yes, exactly. And it's up to us too, and our friends and relations, to help us in all of that. And when we come to the question of old age and people being put in old people's homes, as they call them here in the United Kingdom, care homes or whatever you want to call them, sure, there are some that work very well, that create a society and encourage people to interact. But often, I'm sorry to say, from the experience I've had, it's sad, and people are left alone. It's as though families have felt, well, old Auntie X has been parked, see, in the old person's home. And of course, slowly, she doesn't find it easy. Slowly goes downhill. You're not on top of things anymore. I don't want to be gloomy about this, but I think thinking it through, thinking how you can help those in your family that are unfortunate with what happens to them when they get older, is a very good thing to do, even if it's only making sure that there's a nice visit for an afternoon or an evening to really give good contact. The biggest question that people will tend to raise in relation to life in old people's homes, in care homes, is, when am I going to see somebody I know? Well, of course, they can see the people around them that are also often, therefore, have been parked, if I can put it that way, there because their families can no longer manage to cope with them. We need to think this through. There needs to be a kinder society, is I think the way I'm expressing it. And like that insightful monk in Korea, nobody can be happy alone. I think it's a very general message. It doesn't have to be a Buddhist teaching. It can be the teaching of anybody who has any experience of how people relate to each other. We are designed effectively to be sociable people. And that's another advice I'd like to give to families. Think about how you will make sure that people who grow old in your communities can be made to feel part of the community, even if they can no longer be cared for at home. I've been through this, incidentally. I had a long period of caring for a very close relative, and I know what it takes. It takes a lot to manage it effectively. But my goodness, does it matter? People need contact.
Yeah, I think that, going back to those places that I've been in, places like I was in Mallorca a couple of years ago, and that I went to the cemetery, Dennis, and you'd look at the age at which people die. There were some people who died when they were young, but most of the people were dying like in their late 90s, early hundreds. But
Right.
It is a society where people are very active. They sleep, they eat together. They live, better word, they just live normally.
Yes.
And I think that what we have done is we've sort of, in our effort to industrialize and make everything efficient, we've gotten away from that, and to our
To
detriment.
atomize families. That's
Exactly.
right.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
become small nuclear, and they can't cope because there just aren't sufficient people around.
Yeah.
Because the other relatives will be absolutely continents away. Yes, it is a sad situation. I go very often to a small village in the southern part of France, which is why I know France very well. I speak fluent French too. And when I first went there, the local family next to my little house had 5 generations all living in the same house. There was, I'll call it, giving his name, Monsieur Perruchot. He had his grandmother still living there and his mother still living there. He and his wife were still alive. They had 2 children, and very often they and their children would be in the house. Actually, I now own that house because eventually, as people passed away, it was put up for sale and I acquired it. So unified that particular bit of the village. And I went into the bedrooms of that house. There are only two. There's a loft, and I found a few old beds in the loft. But where on earth did they all sleep? How did they manage? This is a family of about 10 people, often all sleeping together. Well, that's the point. That's what they did. Medieval societies were very much like that. And the point I'm coming to now, go back to the point about the grandmother of Monsieur Perrochot. She was cared for within that family right to the point where she died. There was no question of sending her to an old people's home. Now, that isn't always possible, and I'm not saying people have got to do that. That's very unfair. There are certain situations where it's just impossible. And of course, there will be old people's homes in that part of France too. But there was a different culture, which was very noticeable, particularly in the agricultural societies of that part of France. It's a very agricultural part of France. And the idea that an extended family would look after everybody involved somehow or another was important to them. And we have, I think, in our modern industrialized societies, lost quite a bit of that sense of togetherness. And remember the mantra from that Korean monk, nobody can be happy alone.
I think where we're going to leave this today is the idea of, if you want to live long and healthy, live well.
Indeed. And find the ways of doing so.
Yeah.
And a little bit of research on the internet or with organizations that help people to acquire such information will do you a lot of good. It doesn't take a lot. It's not very expensive. And there are many things you can do that help yourself.
Denis, thank you. We're going to end the podcast. I want to say goodbye, and I want you to stay on. I have a question for you.
That's okay.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you all for listening to the show today. We're going to get to try this in just a moment. The thing that I wanted to ask Denis with offline was I have this circulation issue in my toe, and I thought maybe he could shed some light on it. And we had probably a 45-minute discussion about my toe, which is probably not something that would interest any of you. So just to let you know, it hasn't quite been resolved, but we're working on it. We're going to get to try this in just a second. And remember, try this is just this little fortune cookie thing that we do that may help you improve your life, live a little healthier, live a little longer. We're going to get to that in just a second. One of the things that Denis was talking about was knowing what's going on in your inner health, checking your levels, knowing what's up. And, he recommended you go to your GP like once a year. Okay, you can do that. I do Inside Tracker. I use their ultimate test 4 times a year because I don't want any surprises. I don't want to get to the end of the year and see there's something gone very much awry that I haven't taken any action on. I've been using Inside Tracker for a couple of years. It's really helped me to optimize my life. It is the dashboard to my inner health. If you go to insidetracker.com/aegis, save 20% on all their products. This week on Try This, we're going to talk about something really, really simple: balance and bare feet. So what happens when you're wearing shoes, especially soft, gushy sort of, trainers, running shoes? The nerves in the bottom of your feet sort of go to sleep. And we need those to help us with our balance and our proprioception, our sense of where our body is in space. So this is my suggestion on Try This week. In the morning, when you're brushing your teeth, stand barefoot on the bathroom floor and do a minute on each foot without putting the other foot down. Make sure there's something near you so if you need to catch your balance. And try that every day. Try it twice a day. You can do it in the morning. You can do it in the evening. Brush your teeth, 2 minutes, 1 minute each foot. And you're going to increase your balance. Why do you want to increase your balance? You got less chance of falling down. And, falling down's no good. So super easy. It's free, 0 cost. You can do it twice a day. Try that this week. Thanks, everyone, for joining us on the show today. As always, you have an opportunity to, guess what? Leave us up to a 5-star review wherever you're listening to this. You can leave a comment. You can contact me directly, David@superage.com. Happy to connect you with any of our guests or answer any questions you may have. Everyone, have a wonderful week. We're going to have an episode coming up next week. You're going to like it. Take care now.